Okay. We're next going to move on to item 4A on our regular agenda, fire safety concerns for residential properties bordering open spaces in the Midcoast. I believe we're going to open this with a presentation from a community member. Is that correct, Bill? Now,
Go ahead.
and then we also have in attendance several agencies, and I'm assuming they'll be asked or given an opportunity to speak next before the public?
Yes.
Okay,
That's good.
very good.
So just as a matter of introduction, Brady Logan from the committee for the MCC, the NCCA, that have been looking into, well, basically the turnover from post to GGNRA, has been involved with us for quite some time in community meetings. And one of the issues that came up was safety, and in particular fire safety. And so they've asked to speak here tonight on the issues that are, I guess, most noted in El Granada. But before they start speaking, if there are people from the northern communities up here in West Beach and Montera, if they have similar issues, they should bring them to me on the council. I'm on that committee, and we can incorporate that as we go along. But now I'd like to turn it over to Brady, and you got the.
You can just advance it on the keyboard,
Okay,
yes.
okay, then you handle what you're doing? Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Just to introduce myself, I'm Brady Logan. I'm a resident of Montana. I'm also a member of the Northern Coastal Communities Association, which is a loose-knit group of concerned citizens from El Granada, Moss Beach, and Montana. And I'm here today to talk about our concern with fire safety in the areas bordering our townships. So first of all, I want to say thank you to the folks from CAL FIRE, from the Coastal Fire Protection Agency. I saw someone from the National Park Service. I got people from Post as well. I want to say thank you all for coming out and hearing our concerns. What I'd like to do is I'd like to first characterize the problem. I'd like to identify who we believe are the responsible parties, who is the ownership. I'd like to identify who I believe are the oversight and enforcement responsibility. I want to talk about the community concerns, and then finally a call to action. The first thing is, I never really thought of us as being in a high fire zone, but if you can go into the California Department of Fire government website, and sure enough, we're identified as a very high severity, very high fire hazard severity zone. And I did some further research. I found out that in 1929, which is probably too distant for any of our memories, but there was a major fire around Montana, which fairly well decimated the town. It went on for about a week. So I think that the first thing that people got to come to grips with is that the fire danger in this area is very real, as this map would show. The next would be just more of an acute problem regarding the areas that are surrounding the townships. What we are going to show through this slide are some examples of combustible debris that is accumulated in defensible space. And we think that this is exacerbated by lack of inspections or lack of enforcement. We see groves of eucalyptus really, running rampant in the area, but there's a lack of controls or lack of barrier access also for to prevent cars or motorcycles from getting in the area, and those represent a major fire hazard as well. So the fire safety concern really is, self-evident. You take a walk along the paths that are that cut through the areas adjoining our neighborhoods with the open space. You can see the groves of eucalyptus growing. You can see the debris that's accumulated. You can, and when we try to reach out to organizations who we think are responsible for it, you get a lot of finger pointing or a lot of confusion. We feel that there's a lack of stewardship on the part of the owners, and there's a lack of a single point of control. And, you know, if any of members of CAL FIRE or the Coastal Fire Protection, if I'm wrong about that, then please correct me. And finally, you know, we feel that this is a problem that has really been building over the last 5-10 years. And the urgency is there. We look at the responsible parties. We think the biggest landowners are Post. If you look at the maps surrounding Montera and Moss Beach and El Granada, you'll see that the Post land, the Rancho Corral de Tierra, under the Post stewardship, soon to be the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, those are the areas that we're most concerned with. We also recognize that the Rio Unified School District also owns large tracts of land adjacent to these areas as well. We also recognize that local residents also have ownership. In terms of responsible jurisdictions, I focus on the Coastside Fire Protection District, but I'm kind of confused as to whether it's Coastside Fire Protection District or if it's CAL FIRE. What is the relationship? Who's got the true muscle in overseeing and enforcing state regulations? I haven't noticed in this, actually I believe this is something that Post had generated to tell neighborhoods that they were instructed by the Coastside Fire Protection District to clean up certain areas. And so that leads me to believe that the CFPD is really the responsible party. But again, you know, if San Mateo County or the state agencies, we'd like to understand that. And again, this is another map coming from California Department of Fire, and which shows where some of the oversight should be. The pink zone, it represents state and federal authority. The deep red zone would represent local responsibility area. And you can see there's sections of El Granado which are really covered by both, as well as Moss Beach. And you know, so this is an issue that we brought up to Post. It's been brought up to Post. They've been contacted and asked to rectify the violations. And we had done some digging. We also found that that the Coastside Fire Protection District had also cited Post and given them a period of time to clean up what they saw as violations. And these are a description of the violations which are cited in the notice of the Post. You guys can get a copy of this if you need to see it. So, you know, finally, there's a true concern for loss of property, loss of life. On a personal note, I had my insurance canceled by Allstate because I live across the street from an open space which was identified as a fire hazard. And, you know, so that's higher home insurance, also leads to lower home valuations. I think the big concern, though, is that this community really doesn't have resources to fight a major fire, and that the best recourse then is prevention. And really, our call to action is going to be the immediate and safe removal of combustible materials. So we're asking Post and the Rio Unified School District and homeowners to really clean up their act. And for our you know, for CAL FIRE or Coastal Fire Protection District, we feel you have the authority both to oversee and enforce that those things happen. And so we ask that you take a more active role in doing that. And finally, if I'm wrong on any of this, and you have central points of contact that we can go to help marshal these resources, then I definitely, and my group would definitely like to know. That's all I have. Thank you.
So now I would like to give each of the different parties I've invited. I don't know who wants to go first. Chief, do you want to come up first? You see me anxious, so.
Yeah, I think the fire should go first.
Okay. If you just sort of stand by the
I want to
window.
go back to you.
That's okay. It's okay. It's actually better if you have your back to
Stand in
us.
front of here so I can look at this. How's that?
Okay, can we move the mic over? Just give me a second.
Oh, can you hear me without the microphone?
You're doing fine, you're doing fine. Let's clarify, there's no amplification in this room. The microphones are for the TV camera.
Okay, if I can do that.
It's okay. Just stand up. We can move it over. Chief, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
Okay, I'm John Ferrer. Pardon?
Not for you.
Oops. I think he just went to sleep. Raise up button.
No.
I'm John Ferrer. I'm the chief for CAL FIRE in San Mateo and Santa Cruz counties. Because of my relationship with the Coastside Fire District and their cooperative agreement to have state employees or CAL FIRE employees provide personnel for their fire agency, I'm also then the chief of the Coastside Fire District. And at the same time, because of a similar relationship with the county of San Mateo, I'm the chief of the San Mateo County Fire Department. So you know who's who. Coastside Fire District has 3 stations here along the coast, Montera, Half Moon Bay, and El Granada. The County Fire has a fire station in Pescadero, Skylonda, above Woodside, down here by the new Juvenile Justice Center, Paul Hamus, I think it is, and then another station a little further down on Edgewood. That's County Fire. CAL FIRE then has a fire engine at Pescadero, one at Skylonda, another one at that Belmont facility. We're the ones with the helicopters. CAL FIRE's the ones with the air tankers, the bulldozers, and the hand crews. When you start talking about who's responsible for fire protection in the Corral de Tierra today, it's kind of a combination. So it's not that simple a question to answer. Back around the turn of the century, the state designated areas as SRA, or State Responsibility Areas. And what SRA means is all those lands outside of the city that are considered to be watersheds. So basically anything that's not flat. So exclude the Central Valley, that's pretty flat. Around here you exclude the city limits of Half Moon Bay. And pretty much everything else that you see is SRA. And if it's designated as SRA, or State Responsibility Area, that means the state, or CAL FIRE, has the responsibility for wildland fire protection. Wildland fire protection. That's what gives us access and control of the aircraft and those different resources, because that's what you use for wildland fire protection. At the same time, the Coastside Fire District has within its boundaries a lot of those areas besides the incorporated city of Half Moon Bay. Montera, Moss Beach, Princeton, and this is Jane McShane, she's on the board of directors for the Coastside Fire District, so I think she'll keep you straight. So we have a dual jurisdiction or simultaneous jurisdiction for a lot of these areas. Particularly if you had a map up here that we could put up, and I apologize that we didn't bring one. But on that map, you'll see the Coastside Fire District boundaries, and the area that we're talking about, Corral de Tierra, a lot of it borders the Coastside Fire District jurisdiction. Coastside Fire District certainly responds to wildland fires. Remember, they are the closest fire engine here. And because of the cooperative relationship statewide between federal agencies, state agencies, and local agencies, places fire resources go. no doubt about it. So the first call that comes in for a vegetation fire, pick a place, Corral de Tierra, the first engine that's gonna go is engine 44 or engine 41 from either El Granada or,
Beach. West Beach.
Moss
Beach.
okay, not Moss Beach, is it?
Yeah.
40
Montero.
44 is Moss
No, it's-
Beach,
it's-
41 is El
Well,
Dorado.
we call it Montero, 41 is,
The we that live here call it West Beach.
no, okay, my bad.
It's okay, it's okay.
So that would be the first engine that goes, whether it's for a fire, a medical call, smell of smoke, whatever it is. That's who goes. Now I'm gonna add another layer onto this. Everything that's outside the fire district, that's beyond those boundaries, and it's easy to think of everything south of Half Moon Bay going down to Pescadero and then Nuevo and all that. That's county fire jurisdiction, as is everything north of Montero, going up Devil's Slide. That's San Mateo County Fire's jurisdiction, as well as the areas beyond the coastside's boundary within Corral de Tierra. So some of Corral de Tierra that's in, some of it is county fire jurisdiction, some of it is coastside fire jurisdiction, all of it is SRA. So now, I'm going to tell you how lucky you are, because you've got one poor sap now that's kind of in charge of whoever it is that goes to emergency incidents in Corral de Tierra. So I'm the guy, I'm the buck where it stops. This will change once the land switches from host or private ownership to federal ownership. Because I said there's SRA, those areas in California outside of the city. SRA cannot be on federal lands either. That's called FRA, Federal Response Area. National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Fish and Wildlife. They all have huge holdings in California. They are responsible for the fire protection, planning, prevention, everything on those lands. Now, you probably know there is no National Park Service in San Mateo County. They have holdings, but there's no, well, if I look at this map, you wouldn't see a National Park Service fire engine map. There used to be one in the Presidio. I think there were two in Presidio. That has since changed. So currently, the closest National Park Service resource is on the other side of the Golden Gate in Point Reyes. But don't let that concern you, because remember what I said, closest fire engine goes. The first engine is still going to be this engine from here to respond initially to the area. Currently, for the last year and a half, Roger Wong, who's from the National Park Service, and I and our staffs have been working on an operating agreement that describes exactly how we're going to respond to emergencies in this area as it switches from state responsibility to federal responsibility. You will see no change because CAL FIRE is still going to be the lead agency as far as commanding the on-the-ground resources. We may do things slightly different because of National Park Service requirements for protected areas and habitats, et cetera, but as far as the firefight goes, it's not going to change. We're still going to use air tankers, although we may have special consideration areas where we don't drop retardant. We're still going to use bulldozers, although there's certain areas where we're going to not use the bulldozers if there's an archaeological resource or something there to protect. We're still going to use hand crews. What else have we agreed to so far?
Everything, all fire suppression resources that under the command of CAL FIRE, it will come out of
And this is Roger Wall, National Park Service.
my wall. To pay,
Wait, you better retract a little bit more than that.
well, that's saying it'll come out of
Okay.
the federal
Okay.
treasury.
So it comes out of our wallet.
Everything that Chief Ferraro said is exactly the way we have agreed intend to go forward with this fire protection agreement. As you said, all of the fire suppression resources under his command will be used on a fire once the land transfers over to the National Park Service. The only difference is that I will be paying for it, rather than the state. The federal government will be paying for those suppression resources and the bills and the dollars that's required to put a fire out. The federal government will be paying Chief Ferraro.
Well, not me personally.
Well, that you personally. Right now, I don't mean to interrupt your thing, but right now, under the current SRA agreement, all the funds that go into fighting a fire on SRA lands at Rancho Cucamonga area is from the governor's office. From
It's
the
still
state
out
government.
of all of our taxpayer dollars, but there's just a slight difference here on.
Who's gonna pay for it? I'm gonna be paying for putting out, for Chief Ferraro to put out the fires at Rancho Cucamonga Tierra. I'll be paying for it, or at least the federal government will be paying for it.
Can I just interrupt for a second? So I think one of the points that was missed from the public presentation is not just the who's going to be the first responder, because I'm sure in case of emergency, like I said, you're going to go and get it out, and then you're going to fight over who pays the
Oh,
bill
we're not
later.
gonna fight, yeah.
Yeah, but well, you're going to go back to the rules of engagement and make sure that they're followed properly. But the bigger question that was coming through in this presentation was the preventative stuff. Who's going to do
Part two.
the, quarterly inspections, and who's going to, file the citations, and who's going to follow up? Or like,
Part two.
okay.
Okay, the Coastside Fire District has a vegetation management committee. CAL FIRE, we do a thing, and in conjunction now, we're enhancing what Coastside Fire District was previously doing, and this is Rich Sampson. He's our fire prevention officer. He's also a registered professional forester. He's also the person that's in charge overall of our vegetation management and fuels modification program. So currently what happens, now, and some of you have said that you received notices from the Coastside Fire District about clearance around your property. So there's a couple different programs here, and Rich, step in when I falter. First program comes out of the Public Resources Code, and that's what we call the LE 100 program. That's the 100-foot clearance of vegetation from around your property, excluding ornamental stuff and trees. But that's the clearance that I think most of you received a notice about. Public Resources Code 4291. Coastside Fire District enforces that same section of the Public Resources Code. Either way, it's being done by CAL FIRE employees, because remember, they're CAL FIRE employees at the fire station. And this year, we tried a pilot thing with the district. I'm hoping to do it again next year. We hired, for about a 2-month period, an extra 4 firefighters to go out and increase the number of those LE 100 inspections that we do. And those are the inspections that check for that clearance around your home. They check for branches and leaves overhanging your roof, clearance on gutters, spark arresters on chimneys, et cetera, et cetera. You'll see all those things. Everybody here had an LE 100 inspection? No. No. Give me your name and we'll make sure we come back. No. Our intention is eventually to be able to get every parcel in the district inspected every 3 years. Assuming that once we point out to the landowner what good fire prevention activities are around their home, they will choose to do that on their own annually. So then it's a real simple process of just confirming that, yes, you have clearance. We do know that there are issues when a resident abuts an area that's not subject to the Public Resources Code 4291. Open lands are not subject to 4291. Remember, that's clearance around structures. It's not a blanket clearance of a parcel, or it's not the clearance of the perimeter around the parcel. However, Coastside Fire District does have additional ordinances adopted in their fire code that discuss or talk about or address vacant lots and clearance on vacant lots. The expectation is that that vacant lot be made somewhat fire safe either by mowing or some other mechanical vegetation removal. So by vacant lot, the intention was an acre, quarter acre, a lot in the middle of town that doesn't have a house on it. Not necessarily intended to address a 5,000 acre vacant lot. So certainly there's no expectation that that landowner clears or puts in a perimeter barrier around that entire parcel. Now, another consideration that we've got to look forward to is once the property transfers to federal control and ownership, state laws or fire district laws probably don't apply. And I don't know how much juice that we'll have in doing a 4291 inspection around in federal lands. That's the next part, and you may see a look of surprise on Roger's face here as I announce this. We had a meeting yesterday with the Coastside Fire Districts Management Committee about how can we accomplish the goals of what people are coming here, we believe, to talk about tonight. And that's the clearance around their houses when they abut federally owned land or large controlled holdings. I see a couple of heads shaking yes. Is that what we're here to talk about?
Yes.
Okay. Roger, we'll trade you response to medical calls if we can get a proper clearance behind homes in some of these areas. I'm not putting you on the spot, but that's what we discussed on the board, a call with a small number of the board members yesterday. It was a Brown Act violation. We only had three of the board members out of 7. So it was a discussion in anticipation of this meeting tonight and what we might be asked to do. But that's one of the things that we came up on the phone call. Okay, let's see, and in the areas that we were talking about, and I asked Rich to estimate the amount of clearance that we would have to do. And as I recall, Rich, you pointed out to me that up in that northern boundary, there's a residential area that abuts, and we think that it might be a mile around that residential area. You come a little bit farther south, you come up to about another mile of abutment, if you want to call it. And then when you come down here, you come to another dynamic, which is the Whitlow property, which is not FRA, it's still SRA, but now it's our understanding that the county park system is going to be having some control over that property. So we know that there's houses abutting there, because we've done fuel break projects there before. Is that the...
Pretty close.
Pretty close, okay. Okay, longer than close. No, I want to be accurate. The projects that we have completed
We've
so
been
far...
working with Post on a larger project that Post was put in on the Whitwell property.
Okay, yeah, it's still under control of Post at
Yes.
present. So we have worked with Post to install fire brakes or fuel brakes. A fire brake is not a slight distinction, it's a pretty strong distinction. Fire brake means bare earth. Fire cannot cross a fire brake in concept. So that means there's nothing but mineral soil. Fuel brake, slightly different. Trees are limbed up so that there's no transfer of ground fire to the crowns of the trees and then all this broadcast debris that's burning into the residential areas. It's clearing a lot of that duff from underneath the trees, brush, grass, things like that, but leaving enough so that you have, and some people call it a park-like setting. Jenny, where was the place that we took our picture at?
It was in the Coral Ridge District.
In the Coral Ridge District, if you, up in that, Coral Ridge, thank you. If you're up in that area, you may see behind this long row of houses an area that was solid eucalyptus. We brought in our fire crews, which admittedly they're prisoners with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. They wear the orange, big thing on the back that says CDC prisoner. We bring them in and use them as very intensive labor in areas where we can't do mechanical things, like bulldozers or not weed whackers, bushwhackers, is that what they call them? Massacators. We use these hand crews to clear the area. What we find is not just vegetation, but there's tires beer cans, there's all this other junk, and we have to be careful if there's not cigarette butts, because the prisoners can't have access to nicotine. But we have programs like that we can do. We're contemplating on how best to approach this issue with the new landowners as this transition occurs. I don't know if that will satisfy everybody's concerns. Certainly the perimeter area where they do abut this big open parcel of natural vegetation, that should at least simmer down some of the anxiety that people are having. Remember, we're talking about an area that doesn't have a huge fire history. You mentioned the fire in 1929. Rich, how big was that fire in 1929?
There was a fire in the teens that went through Wicklow and was a standard place for fire. Then there was another one, I thought it was in the 40s or even 50s, it was a second standard place for fire, but I'd have to, but it went through the Wicklow property, cleaned it out. The big difference is looking at the fire suppression resources that were available when those two occurred versus now. It's completely different.
And what Rich is saying is 40 years ago, 60 years ago, when those two fires occurred, and y'all admit, it's a pretty rare day on the coast here where you get those humidity, low humidity, strong winds. Not very many days that you get that type of fire weather, critical fire weather here. The designation, and Rich and I talked about this briefly, the designation of a VH, very high fire hazard severity zone, was mostly reflective of the fuel type. And that if a fire were allowed to burn unchecked in eucalyptus, because of the fuel type, the debris and the embers that would become airborne is significant. Now, whether the conditions occur for that type of fire to occur, the fire get big enough to generate that, not too common. However, if that were allowed to happen, it could. I'll tell you another amusing story. Well, I haven't told you anything amusing yet.
Chief, do you want to mention also that the ISO rating, because that man mentioned his insurance with Allstate?
Correct. Two things here, I'll get to that in a second. I think it was our third or fourth day as CAL FIRE providing the personnel here. I happened to be up in Montana, and I was driving back to a meeting. I thought I saw smoke over to the east of Half Moon Bay. Sure looked like smoke to me, but they've been wrong, they've been fog, but no. It was about a 5-acre fire that we had at Spanish Towns, back up in the eucalyptus. And of course, I was concerned, oh great, my first day here, look what happened. But as it turns out, and I do load fires in eucalyptus. Not so much along the coast because of the high humidities, but I live in San Benito County, where we also have a lot of eucalyptus. A little bit drier, a little windier. Eucalyptus is not popular as far as what I would for my front yard. But we were able to contain the fire, kept it at 5 acres, although it was burned pretty good, because of changes in the fire response from 50 years ago or 60 years ago, where we didn't have air tankers, didn't have helicopters. If you were around that day, you saw, I think it was a Orion P3, that was the air tanker that day that flew down from Redding. Pretty impressive. If you've seen one of those drops and you kind of buzzed over the top of Half Moon Bay, and I guess the people in Half Moon Bay realized that, okay, CAL FIRE's here, let's see how this works. So there's quite a bit of difference. Jenny mentioned the Insurance Services Organization, or ISO, which we, just as the fire district has just gone through a process, and the ratings lowered in general for all parcels in the county, which would result in a decrease. It might be slight because we moved from a 5 to a 4. It might be slight, but there should have been a decrease. However, we are aware that insurance companies will disaggregate areas, and some homes, and this is a lot more prevalent in Santa Cruz County than it is here in San Mateo County, but homes that are way in the forested wildland areas, some of those people are getting cancellation notices from their insurance companies. I am not surprised to hear that is occurring in some parts of this county where we're abutting or even building within eucalyptus. And I've probably gone over my 5
Chief?
minutes.
I'd like to ask you to speak to an issue that I've gotten. I'm still getting phone calls on this, and it was like 2 years ago. The clear cutting that was done on post land at Columbus near Santa Maria. I think it was about 2 years ago, and I'm telling you, I'm still getting complaints about the way that was handled. It looks like a war zone today. It still looks like a war zone.
Shouldn't
that be a question for
Post?
Yeah, I'll let Post answer that.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, can we do the fire questions first to answer what the presentation was about?
By the way, there was a 2-acre fire in the El Granada Hills in the mid-90s, in the Ute Forest.
Yes, and we did look at a map. I looked at it just this morning that we received that showed all the areas in and around this particular holding in the last
10 years,
10 years.
94 to 2010.
And there were about 15 to 20 fires. Some of them were 5 feet in diameter. Some were a half acre. I think there was one 2-acre fire. And only one of those fires was within the proposed boundaries for this parcel. So I've talked enough. If there's no specific questions for us,
Is there any other questions on fire from the community? Okay, go
I
ahead.
think Roger also wants to talk about fire too.
Okay.
I have a question. If I wanted to create a fire break around my parcel because I have some acreage, who would I come to?
Well, now we come to another issue. And I appreciate you bringing it up. There's also some restrictions, as you well know, along the coast here caused by the Coastal Commission and their requirements as far as permits, et cetera, to clear vegetation. He's the expert on that. And I'm going to leave to Rich. Rich, by the way, is a Half Moon Bay resident, so be gentle. You probably see him quite often. Can you go first and then you can, or do you want to go first?
Well, let me just mention,
Oh.
just maybe to help answer that question you had, or supplement that question you had. Park Service has been engaged with a organization called the California Fire Alliance. Homeowner groups, fire safe councils, private individuals, tax districts can submit applications for grant funding for fuels management work. It would help if a bunch of your neighbors, perhaps, maybe not individually, but if there are some neighbors in your area that would like to, that feel strongly about having a fire break around their area, they can submit a proposal for a grant proposal. I know that since 2002, the National Park Service has given out about $500,000 worth of grants to, in my area, Point Reyes, Golden Gate NRA, Pinnacles National Monument. We gave $37,000 to San Mateo Fire Safe Council a few years back to do some fuels management work. Your local Fire Safe Council who, should know about this, and I think it just finished up their grant cycle, I think last week or something like that for this year, so it's kind of too late. But there's that process, and there's money out there to help citizen groups. I know Rich knows about it, and that's just another alternative.
This might be a better question for Rich, but I'm going to ask it early on because I'm not sure which organization might have a different position from another on it. My question deals with vegetation removal. We've heard so far talk of mechanical removal of vegetation as well as manual removal. My concern is more the use of herbicides and pesticides, specifically Roundup, and whether there's a differentiation between which organizations, if any of them, continue to use Roundup in our area. And the concern is, that there's some studies out now, we've long known that it's had an impact on animal life.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's being linked to birth defects and human ailments. The problem with that is, unlike the rest of San Mateo County, there are a lot of private homes on shallow wells, mine included. So So in essence, anything that's used on the ground surface is going to leach down into those aquifers. And so I'd like to understand as we go cycle through these organizations, which are continuing to use Roundup mechanical versus something like Roundup, which is actually taken off the market.
Thank you for the information.
Yes.
Can I go first? I know you have a lot more, because you're a RPF, I'm just a Forest Service. Those are all tools. Herbicide, mechanical, hand, scribe burning. Those are all tools in a toolbox that we can use to manage vegetation. There's no one tool we use for every situation. I can't say whether that, at this point, I haven't looked at the vegetation. I can't say whether we would or would not use it. It's a tool that we have to look at. I think Rich would agree. It's just a tool that in our toolbox, that we determine when we do decide what's the best effective method. So it's all site-specific, so I couldn't really tell you, who uses what.
So I know the county's they're updating their study now, the Department of Public Health and Safety, on the effects of Roundup and some of these chemicals on the water table, and I would recommend that when you evaluate tools, that you may want to do an environmental report yourself,
Oh, sir?
especially around private homes and on wells.
Sure. Yeah.
Before we go on with the further discussion, I have a question relative to the objective on this agenda item. It's phrased, I believe, with the explicit concern that there's a transfer of ownership of property between Post and GGNRA. And I believe the action being brought forward is there some impact or action thought with regard to that transfer, either responsibility of the leaving party or what the accepting party is going to take on, et cetera. Is that correct?
That's correct. Well, we'd like, since we know that the transfer is imminent, but we also know that it can face some delays. And we feel that the threat is acute. And we would like Post to really take ownership of the problem. Since they own the property today. That would be prior to handoff to.
I understand. So what I'm interested in is getting clarification from Post and the GGNRA with respect to the transfer, given that that's the concern. So I know that there are any number of concerns about fire management and a lot of technical issues that exist there. But to do credit to the issue we brought forward, I'd like to see the two agencies have a chance to speak to that. I don't care which order they go in, that is GGNRA and Post.
Do you want to focus on that?
Now,
Great jump, I'm glad to do that.
But don't go away.
Thanks. Great, okay. Paul Ringgold, I'm the Vice President for Stewardship of Peninsula Open Space Trust.
Could you
And
move closer to the microphone so
Sure.
it gets picked up on TV?
Before I get into talking about the transfer, I just want to make sure, I know most of you in this room are familiar with the Post and the work that we've done. We've been working on the peninsula since 1977 to save open space for the public. We are a nonprofit organization that serves as an interim landowner. We buy land from willing sellers in a private negotiation environment, and then we own that land, hold it on an interim basis until we find a public agency buyer or a private buyer that will buy the land subject to a conservation easement that we hold back that assures that certain conservation values will be maintained. And that, just as an example, on the Rancho Corral de Tierra property, although that property comprises 4,280 some odd acres, there is a 300-acre portion of the property on the flats that is an active row crop farm. We're not transferring that piece to the Park Service. We're retaining ownership of that piece, and we hope to transfer that piece to a private agricultural buyer that would continue to farm that. And we wanted to assure that the farming operation remains viable on that property. So before I get to the issue of the transfer, I wanted to have a chance to respond to the comments that were made in the presentation, particularly to both Rancho and Wicklow. Post acquired Rancho over a series of transactions from 2001 to 2003. Since that time, we have been actively managing that property. In terms of fire management, we have coordinated annually with the local fire authorities, primarily the Coastside Fire Protection District, on the priorities for mowing hill breaks along the boundaries with communities. We've done that work on an annual basis. We will continue to do that work on an annual basis until the property is transferred. In terms of the notice of correction that you put up on the screen, and that was the same notice of correction that was related to the sign that we posted about the work we were doing to address that. That was a notice that we received in 2009 based on a change that was made in the local fire regulations that we were not aware of. We took full responsibility for addressing that. We immediately corrected that action, and we have continued to maintain those boundaries subject to the new regulations. On the Wicklow property, which we acquired, I believe in 2005, that property came to us subject to the forest condition that it's currently in. My recollection was that either just before or just after we acquired that property, we received a similar notice of correction that put us on notice that we were receiving this property subject to some violations of the fire code. In response to that, we immediately coordinated with both the local fire authorities as well as CAL FIRE on what we needed to do. There were specific elements that were outlined in this notice of correction that we needed to address. We worked with the local authorities to address that. I can't speak to what happened on the other side of our boundary. I know that the local fire authorities worked or made an attempt to reach out to each of the individual lot owners on the other side of our boundary. But on our side of the boundary, we implemented the 100-foot break that was referred to. And I think, Leonard, that is the issue that you mentioned, and I just wanted to tie that in. That was a required action that we took on based on notice of correction. And in addition to that, we developed a fuels management plan for the entire property that we continue to work with the county on identifying high priority areas. Our focus is, so far on that property has been to maintain key elements of the road network in place to allow for access in the case of fire. But in addition to that, we have been seeking funds for implementing elements of that plan, and we continue to maintain that fuels buffer.
Well, I think we need to hear from the fire prevention people on whether it's really necessary to clear cut a 100-foot swath right next to the residential area, because that's what the people are not happy with. And the people in the audience here who are asking for this, when it's done, you're not going to be happy with the results.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that covers.
I don't think that we're asking for a 100-foot clear-cut swath, but I, well appreciate your charter, well appreciate your efforts to maintain the property. Some of the photographs that I put into the presentation, they highlight some of the remediation efforts that we've made, and what they depict is an accumulation of debris, which in and of itself constitute a hazard. So in remediation, I would ask that you be more diligent.
I mean, all I can say is that we coordinate annually with the fire authorities to make sure that we're compliant. And we also work with individual landowners. I know, just as an example, in response to Catherine's earlier question, we have, landowners will often approach us and request to do additional work on our side of the boundary that goes above and beyond what we've already done. And we encourage, we basically have always been responsive to those requests. We grant licenses to those landowners to do additional work as long as it doesn't conflict with the county.
We have him and we have the GG ready to respond, but let's, what else he wants to. Yeah.
Paul, do you have a point of contact or just on the website?
I don't see, it's Jim Jogas, I don't see him. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have a point, well, our website has our phone number, and people call post, if they call, if it's a cold call, they will be directed to that point of contact, but I can tell you that the point of contact now at post is Jeff Powers, our conservation project manager. And Jeff will work with you, he's actually been spending quite a bit of time in the Wicklow area recently, so I'm sure you've
Yeah.
probably seen him.
So Wicklow will still be your concern as we move through
Wicklow
this?
is not being transferred to the Park Service.
So-
And there is no current plan. The county certainly has expressed interest in the property. It
Correct.
surrounds the Quarry Park piece. It would certainly be a great addition. But at this point, there's no
Yeah.
concrete plan.
So,
in place.
so to follow up from that, I was interested in both a follow-on from GGNRA, but before doing that, ask you, Rich, if you have anything to clarify relative to the statements of what they did with regard to the actions taken when they took over the land.
Well,
If you could go up to the night, yeah.
And just, I won't come back to the podium unless I'm asked. Nancy Warner will talk about the transfer. We didn't get
Sure.
to that point yet.
No, I just wanted to give him a chance to clarify before we do it.
Chief Sampson to introduce.
But before you leave, I'm sorry, there's one board member question. Do you have a question?
One of the points in the letter was major tree cutting and clearing that was done over a year ago. It was done along Pedro, is it San Pedro Mountain Road, the road between Pacifica and Montara. And as a result of that, they left big piles of dead wood and brush along the road, and that's still there a year later. I walk on that road a lot. I've been wondering for a long time when they're gonna come back and finish the job. This is a lot of dead trees and obviously a fire hazard stacked along the side of the road there. I think it's part of the big major clearing that was done last summer.
Yeah, I'll have to, I will look into that. I believe that was done by the county. It's basically that
I have
San
no
Pedro
idea.
Road is a county road, and so
Right,
there was work that was
okay.
done there.
They didn't, okay, I didn't know, it's post land though, isn't it?
It's that road actually is county, is
Uh-huh.
a county road that crosses post land, but I
Okay.
absolutely will look into that and
Okay.
coordinate. I believe it's the area behind the equestrian facilities.
The road that goes
Right,
between
the
Montara
eucalyptus.
and Pacifica. No, this isn't eucalyptus.
Yeah,
These
it-
were cypress trees.
At some point, it becomes part of McNeese, in
We can talk
McNeese.
offline about
The
this.
road between Montara and Pacifica
Yes,
is
the
not
fire
on
road.
post land. That is on
Most of
Eagle
that's-
Ranch State Park.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's across the pedestrian bridge that crosses Martini Creek,
Yes.
that's off of post
That's-
property.
so who-
That's, I would suggest contacting McNee Ranch State Park.
Okay.
Okay.
And the other comment I just wanted to encourage some common sense with this clearing. I observed a clearing that was done on post property by a landowner across the road from the lot that they cleared, and it was just, they cut down everything on the lot. It was a major clear cut under the proposed reason of fire hazard, but they didn't clear the trees that were actually eucalyptus trees next to their house. And it looked to me like an obvious attempt to clear their view corridor. So I really wanted to encourage posts to use some common sense, and I realize there's a lot of push to make accommodations for fire prevention, but sometimes I question whether that's really the motive behind the clearing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Take
thanks.
that into consideration.
Okay, Rich?
Let's get Chief Sampson.
a lot of different issues. Probably the best place to start is Roger mentioned, was there are a lot of tools in the toolbox for vegetation management. Looking at the problem here, specifically from vegetation management concern from my end, to me, the focus is the eucalyptus. The native vegetation that's normally on those hills, if you look at some of the old photographs from pre-1900 of what's on those hills, you don't see the dark green that you're looking at right now. You see the chaparral, the coastal chaparral, the peyote bush, toyon, coffeeberry. Completely different fuel type from what you have now with the pine and the eucalyptus that weren't there before. So when you start looking at the different fires that you'll get in that fuel type versus what you're going to get with the eucalyptus that we have now, completely different scenario. If you have first choice would be try to get it back to the native vegetation that we had before. That's what's adapted for these hillsides. Unfortunately, there's a few bureaucratic and also other reasons to not go straight to that point. Coastal Commission has some regulations about significant vegetation and litter that limits what we can do. With a lot of studies and a lot of money and a local coastal development permit, you can go and clear the eucalyptus out to make the break between the fuel and the trees. Keep in mind, when you're trying to protect your residents, you're trying to make sure that flames from whatever that fuel is downslope on the level, they're not going to reach and impinge upon your structure. The rule of thumb is your flame lengths are about 1.5 times the height of your vegetation. So when you have a 100-foot tree, your flame lengths are 150 feet. So those of you that remember the Oakland Hills fire, or the trading fire from 2008 that we had down by Watson Road, that's what we were dealing with. So if I had my way, and I'm a forester, and I agree, this may be a little naive, I would try to get it back to the native vegetation that had a lot smaller flame length. So when you have a 50-foot tall structure, you would probably be able to have native vegetation maybe 30 feet away without any problem. Instead of, well, I'll let you do the math, how far you're going to clear the eucalyptus back. Now, I've worked in the area,
Can you clarify the flame length issue? Because it sounds like you're talking about horizontal.
horizontal, it all depends on how the wind's blowing. But if you have a eucalyptus tree that's fully involved and you have wind behind it, it is quite routine to see flame lengths 1.5 times. And with higher wind, you might be able to get longer flame
You're
lengths.
saying it could be that much laterally?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something that we see quite frequently in the Australian fires from a couple summers ago is something that you've seen that in. So, but getting beyond that though, granted there's regulatory problems with going out and clearing that. So in our efforts, working with Post and working with some of the other landowners, we've come to the conclusion that we can't spend the money to go ahead and make that full clearance. Now Post, I don't know if I can share the dollar magnitude, but if it's okay with you. Post for the 15-acre clearing project that they put on, that would come closer to complying with what really needs to happen out there, spent about $60,000 on permit costs and about $200,000 on clearing costs, actually paying the contractor to do what they did on that hill. You just don't see that in private landowners doing that type of expensive fuel clearance projects in this area. I mean, most people can't afford that. I can't afford that. And so that's one end of the spectrum. After they did that, we worked with the Park Service, we worked with, to get some grants, we worked with the Resource Conservation District, we worked with the school district, and we also worked with Post to try to do another test plot, working with inmate crews, to fit within the regulations that we have today to do what we could do to try to at least minimize the fire danger. And so what you see along the coral reef boundary with the school district and continuing on up towards the intersection with St. Carlos is an example of that. By the restrictions that we have, we can only cut up to 6 inches in diameter. Now granted, when you're looking at 36 and 60-inch diameter trees, and there's a lot of them out there, we're a long ways from getting to where we need to be.
Is that a county restriction? Are you?
The 6 inches is what the county has agreed with the Coastal Commission is what we can clear up to without having to get a full coastal development permit.
Is there no differentiation between eucalyptus trees and, for instance, other more native type trees like cypress and the chaparral you were talking about?
The eucalyptus trees, of course, are not native here.
But in terms of cutting what you can cut down, there seems to be a lack of common sense in choosing vegetation.
Well, I can't speak to the cypress tonight, but looking at the eucalyptus, if I had my way personally, and looking at some of the studies that, in fact, they have some studies going on over at UC Berkeley right now on other eucalyptus stands, what they're finding is they're going in and trying to clear away a lot of the eucalyptus and getting the native vegetation to come back underneath. And they've been finding that's been working. If we can get oaks and the coffee berry and the toyon to come back up and replace it, granted, you're not gonna get a 150-foot tall or a 100-foot tall tree for shade. You'll be approaching more of what should be on that hillside and what's supported, what that hillside would support. But it'll be aesthetically drastically different from what a lot of people purchase homes to be in. But it'd be a lot safer.
Something that I think would get a lot more bang for the buck and wouldn't require any permits at all. I live right at the ocean end of the coral reef forest, basically 100 feet from 120-foot tall yews. And it seems to me that if you would clean up what I guess is called duff, I call it garbage, on the forest floor, you're gonna get a lot more bang for the buck in fire prevention by clearing all of that out, because it's typically this thick there, and I'm sure that's a much greater fire hazard than the trees themselves.
I'm not gonna get into the debate, but that is precisely what we did with that project for that 100-foot or 75 or 100-foot corridor along the back of the structures on Coral Reef. Is we sent the crews in, we limbed up the eucalyptus trees that were in there, took all the small ones less than 6-inch diameter out and chipped them, and put that on the ground as chips. What we were trying to do is raise the ladder fields. If you look at a normal eucalyptus forest, you're going to see leaves and branches and bark all the way down to the ground. Now, what you think is the ground is probably not dirt. In Wicklow and most other large eucalyptus stands on the coast, anywhere between 3 and 5 feet deep. And all that is litter coming off the trees. I mean, you all live here, you know what that's all about. And so what we would do is we went in there and limbed everything up, got rid of all the loose material, clean that up and turn it into wood chips.
But if you
When the fuel is in long, thin arrangement where you have a high surface area, that's a lot more flammable than if it's in wood chips and it's all compacted and you don't have the air all around it, and it holds in the moisture. So we converted it without removing it from the site.
Okay.
The
But
problem
Leonard,
is the
Leonard-
oil is toxic to everything else, and the native
Leonard,
stuff isn't gonna
I'm
come
going to ask you to hold, because we're really trying to move through to the issues of the transfer.
And I think, Sheriff, I may have spent enough time on that. If there's anything more specifically that you would like me to address.
I think if you would hold there, and I'd like to hear from the GGNRA next.
Okay.
So, my name is Nancy Porter, I'm the Planning Division Chief at GGNRA, and usually Brian Villas from the Planning Division is here to talk to your organization, and he couldn't be here tonight, so I'm here instead. And I just wanted to give a couple of quick updates. Well, first of all, as I've said before, still true, we're in the home stretch on the acquisition, and we expect to be complete with that before the end of the year, so that's really good news. We've been working for a long time with Coast, and they've been very patient, but it's really, they've been doing a great job, and it's really time for that transition to happen and for the Park Service to step in and do the management of the property, and we're prepared to do that. I think, you heard from Roger and the fire chiefs here tonight that we have the agreements in place. We're aware of the work that Coast has been doing to mow along the boundary, and we're prepared to continue to do that. And, we've done a lot to understand what we're getting into in this property, and we have learned a lot, but we still have a lot to learn. We've been out talking to a lot of the people in the community, and we still have a lot more of that to do. But I think we've made a lot of great strides in doing that, and we'll still be in initial phases of understanding and stabilizing what's happening on that property, and I think we'll be in a more slow and thoughtful process on any big changes. But I think the good news is, we've got these agreements in place for fire, and we're just one player in this community. There are a lot of public land managers here between county parks and state parks and the Unified School District. And I think we're prepared to be involved in a coordinated effort with the land managers and the communities working together and make sure we do our fair share. And it's really encouraging for us, I think, to hear the strong interest in the community to work together with us. So that's really great.
Okay. The other landowner mentioned here was a school district. I do not see Jim Jogas, or is anyone, Jim Jogas is back there. Jim?
Good evening, I'm Jim Jogas, Facilities Director for Early Unified School District. Been there a long time. As my granddaughter said, I was around when dinosaurs roamed the earth. In my tenure there, that land has been cleaned up, or tried to be cleaned up 3 times. About 25 years ago, perhaps. And then we tried about 4 years ago and got shot down because we just went out there with the help of, I think it was the Cal Fire and prisoners, and started to do the little dust things and cutting, and then we were shut down. And it took us a long time working with Rich and his group and the Half Bay Protection District to get all the regulations. I thought we got there, then we had to hire a biologist to go out, and we didn't, we had some money, people chipped in some money to hire everybody to do things. And then we were able to put about, let's see, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, Cal Fire came up with probably 30 guys, a lot of equipment, and spent a week in there clearing, cutting, but they could only cut up to 6 inches. They wanted to cut, trust me, a lot more to really clean it up, but they couldn't do it. And without their help, there was no way that the school district was going to be able to do this. At the dollar amount, right now, we just lost 10 teachers, a principal. Our crews have gone over 50%. We lost 65% of our grounds crew. So, I mean, we have 2 people to take care of everything, all the sites. It's impossible. The good thing is, though, Rich Sampson, a local, is looking now as we speak for grants. And the grants have kind of shrunk us, so we could get back in there a year or 2 and do another nice job on it and try to get bigger trees down. But again, without their help, nothing would happen.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. Nancy, do you have something else to say?
I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but because I have this in my hand, but we've also just launched a 60-day public review of our general management plan, which is a master plan, broad concepts for the whole park, and it does include Rancho Corral de Tierra, and this is a summary version of the plan, just a proposed alternative. There's a box of them in the back, so please take them. And we're having a public meeting on the coast side, or actually in Pacifica, at Ingrid B. Lacey Middle School on Tuesday, September 27th from 4 to 7 p.m. That's one of 3 public meetings, and that's the one in San Diego. And I'll just postcard in the back of that information as well. And I did bring a couple CDs of the full 3-volume set of all the alternatives and the environmental impact statement. I'll leave those here, and all the documents are online for your review. So 60-day public review period ends November 9th, and we'd love to hear from you.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy. We have 2 members of the public who have asked to speak on this topic, but before we do, I want to clarify, my understanding is that the particular action you're interested in would be as an advisory body for the MCC to recommend to the county that either certain things happen before this exchange occurs or that the transfer of land be slowed. What particularly are you interested in seeing?
What I'm asking for is just a more diligent effort in policing the property. I think the expectation on post is that they take care of their land. What I've heard here today, from their viewpoint, is that they are. I think that we can, you know, and I'm so glad you're here, Paul. Thank you again. But so it's nice to know that we have someone we can go to and call your attention. that we have specific trouble spots that are concerned. You know, I guess and we'll do that. So the other side from CAL FIRE, National Park Service, it's a myriad of organizations that have to work to know who to call. So again, thank you, Rich and Roger and Nancy for coming out, and now we have people that we know are listening and who we can contact. But I think the expectation is that there is diligent stewardship on the part of Post, and that that there's also from our government organizations that there's diligent oversight and enforcement of code. I'm not advocating any slowdown of transfer property.
Okay, so you're hearing intended to go ahead with the transfer, that with respect to fire danger, both sides recognize the issue, and GGNRA is saying they expect to step up to
Len, can I make
whatever
one?
it is. Yes.
So, and Brady, Meredith, those of you that I've been working with, I think on the last slide, to all the different organizations that came here tonight, and I want to thank you for your time, but having worked with the group here, I think it was pretty clear, and the last slide summed it up, and I'll get you copies of that, but the first thing was the immediate and safe removal of the debris fields, the combustible debris that are in that 100-foot area that's close to residences. And as far as the community is concerned, we don't care which organization cleans it up. I think it's just needs to be cleaned up and fairly immediately. And then going forward, some of the issues that were brought up, today it's Post, but it's being transferred to GGNRA. It's that there's a continuity in that handoff, and that the process as it gets defined and as the community gets to know it better, going through Rich Sampson or John Ferreira, that it's clear to the community on a couple of things. One is, who's the point man, and I'm glad, John, you stepped up and we're going to get your cell number. But the
821-254-1700.
Okay, I have it. So I'll pass it out. But the big thing here is that there's a well-understood process, at least within our community, of how inspections take place, when they take place, and that information is publicized so people know what's being done right and maybe what's being done wrong, so we don't have to wait until there's an event that happens that, we can draw resources to it. And I think what they were asking for is, because this is complex and it crosses a lot of different groups, we want to plan to work with Supervisor Horsey's office, who's been doing a lot with the community on this, to make sure that we have someone to go to that can kind of help us clear all these different organizations and jurisdictions and the legal, financial implications of all that. So that's the last slide, basically, in a nutshell, which is what they're looking for.
Thank you.
And so I think they're asking us to.
Yeah.
write a letter in
So I
that.
have now two members of the community I want to recognize. I just want to make sure we're clear what's on the table for discussion. So the first is Lisa Ketchum.
I'm Lisa Ketchum, currently a business council candidate, but I'm speaking tonight as president of the Pillar Ridge Homeowners Association. At Pillar Point Bluff Open Space Preserve, a fire break or fuel reduction needs to be mowed annually where the meadow west of the Air Force Trailhead adjoins the northern boundary of Pillar Ridge community. Last year, we reached agreement with Post to do this, but now the property's been transferred to the county. Pillar Ridge has a 6-foot chain link fence along this boundary, and right up to the fence are tall, non-native weed species, hemlock, fennel, bristly oxtongue, which typically leave tall combustible material that remains standing after dying and drying out. So it's to be mowed on a regular basis. About a year ago, there was a grass fire on this parcel, the northern side, and CAL FIRE was terrific with planes and the whole thing, but the wind was just blowing right at us with this, and so a fire break there would be great. Here's a picture of the stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Map.
Okay, the next speaker is Oscar Braun.
director and co-founder of the Half Moon Bay Coastside Foundation. We're involved with various programs with the federal and state government. The first one that we got involved in 1994 was the Water Quality Protection Program, which is under the auspices of NOAA. In 2000, CAL FIRE's Chief Wirt, who was Chief Ferrera's predecessor, asked our foundation to take on 2 additional missions. One was to be the first fire safe council in the private sector, representing the homeowners in the WUI area, what is known as the wildland urban interface, which I think many of you have started to come to know more and more about. And the second was to be a California Coordinated Resource Management and Planning Council. And we operate within all the rules and regulations that are put out, of course, by the state of California, whether it's CEQA or the Coastal Commission or the federal statutes underneath or what have you. We are a neutral party, and we act to the benefit of the public. We have been, for well over 11 years, been accumulating all sorts of data about the 36 watersheds that make up the San Francisco Peninsula. And our primary mission, that's always at the forefront of our work, is the protection of our Hetch Hetchy reservoirs and also all the natural resources and special species that we have within those 36 watersheds. We oppose this transfer to of the Rancho Corral de Tierra to the Golden Gate National Recreational Area, and for the simple reason that back in 1994, when the San Francisco Water Company did a public survey of all the water users, 2.4 million, 2 million for our town at that time. Now it's up at 2.5 million. But out of that survey came the water users, the taxpayers' direction to the San Francisco PUC as to how they wanted the 23,000 acres in which the PUC owns where the reservoirs reside. 85% of those polls said first and #1 priority is the protection of the water and of course the natural resources within the watershed. And they wanted that attained by having highly restricted access by the public at large to protect those resources were not disturbed or damaged. Up until 1994, at that time, you could very, very rarely get onto the watershed lands, and when you did, it was by a special permit and it was a guided tour. Since 2001, when the SFPUC developed what is known as the Environmental Impact Report, which I'm sure that you're all acquainted with, and also the management plan for the watershed. A component of that is, of course, the fire management plan, which is a very thick document, and of which I have read more times than I'd like to count. But what you've heard here this evening regarding the fuel loads, we have an incredibly volatile vegetative types that make up the fuel loads, not only in the PUC lands, but throughout these 36 watersheds, including on Rancho Corral de Tierra, and specifically, since it was brought up earlier tonight, in what is known as now the Whitlow property. Whitlow property, of course, was originally part of the original Rancho land grant, and the name was changed to Whitlow by the O'Neill family when they acquired the property, I believe, in 2000 or 2001. The Whitlow property was donated, given as a gift to Post in 2000.
Oscar, excuse me, we try to keep the public comments in the 3-minute range, and also specifically, we're trying to get comments with regard to the Corral de Tierra Post to GGNRA transfer.
Okay, I understand. We oppose that transfer, and we oppose the transfer because, one, as we stand here tonight, in our inquiries, whether it be with Post or whether it be with the GGNRA, they have absolutely no idea what is the number of people who are accessing these watersheds. and that, again, that are joined to the PUC lands and putting those lands at risk for catastrophic water fires. If you go to our website, which is cwposse.org, you will find on there the San Francisco Fire Management Plan. And you can read it for yourself. All this comments this evening regarding the low risk because of the humidity that the chief brought up, and he has told me that himself, that's his opinion, contradicts at 180 degrees what is stated in the SFPUC fire plan. And if you read the Whitlow Fuel Management Plan, which was developed in 2005, this is the very high fire risk, not high, very high. And the communities that have the highest risk and in the highest risk zone are your communities from, of course, Montero down through El Granada. Those groves generate a heat that the duct, we were talking about the duct, is the fuel load, is normally, I think it's important information that the public has a right to know.
I think I believe is your point that the transfer from post to the GGNRA would increase the risk, or do you have concerns about either agency managing the property?
It would increase the risk because the owners have not done anything regarding security. Otherwise, the monitoring of the type of activities that are going on in these lands, or the amount of people accessing the lands, the history is a matter of public record.
Okay.
And in the event of a fire, specifically, again, because Whitlow was brought up, okay, once that forest ignites, it will literally explode. You have in excess of 30 tons per acre of duff, this fuel. And the embers from the 250-foot flames, both horizontally and vertically, as the chief was saying here, will send embers 2 to 5 miles.
Very good. Okay, Oscar?
For all your communities. So we can have...
Oscar, if you'd like to register anything with us, we can make sure it's there, but I think you've made your comment. You've passed your time limit? But I just want to make sure we've registered your comment accurately.
Well, you certainly have. Thank
Okay,
you very much.
thank you very much. The next speaker is Catherine Slater-Carter.
Thank you, Len. I'll be very brief. I know a lot of folks, both here and in this room and other parts of the community, have a great deal of fear and loathing of eucalyptus. One of the things I think that people need to be aware of is eucalyptus are very powerful in their ability to dehydrate the soils and to stop runoff. And in that, they actually stop a fair amount of landslides and small kinds of debris flows. I am concerned that if we get rid of all of our eucalyptus without looking at a plan to replace them, to take them out slowly and replace them with other vegetation that does that, we will end up with a lot of little landslides and debris flows that will take out people's houses and obstruct the roads and so on. There's a fair amount of research on this in Australia. I've watched a particular creek in El Granada, which has been dry for many, many years because it has the eucalyptus actually uphill on what I believe is Whitlow property. And so it has dried up the creek downstream. If all of those trees get eliminated quickly, we're going to end up with some other problems, unanticipated consequences. So I think a full understanding of what's going on needs to be paid attention to. And David, I would comment that one of the only ways to get rid of poison oak is with Roundup, which has a half-life of 2 weeks or less, if used properly. And the real key with Roundup is using it properly. Finding crews who can go in to hand remove eucalyptus is a touchy thing. It's not anything anybody volunteers to do, and you can't burn it because it gets in people's lungs.
Okay. Catherine, just to quickly respond, I think the problem is you're right, there are more responsible ways to use Roundup that minimizes its ability to get into the water table, but there's also a saturation method that's commonly used where they basically just douse
I would recommend if you're afraid of your water quality, please get a connection to Montero Water and Sanitary District in the
Okay.
urban area. Thank you.
I want to thank you both there. So I guess at this point, Ms. Brady and Bill, I want to ask whether the discussion that's heard, both the people who've responded and what they've said, satisfies concern relative to asking a county for intervention and quick resolution on an issue.
Well, I mean, it certainly has been informative. I think it's highlighted the issues that the community has been feeling about confusion of who owns which piece of the puzzle here and how that's getting executed and the rest of it. I'll go back to what I said just earlier. I think this is a start. I'm glad to see all your faces. I really want to thank you for showing up and coming here and trying to explain this to the community. But I also think that now that we've got this information, we'll be having another community meeting under the MCC committee function to see what the next steps are. And I believe we're going to do a walkthrough with some of the county people on Friday, right? Is that still on, or, well, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's.
Okay,
not-
but if not, we'll be following up with Supervisor Horsley's office.
Which area is the walkthrough?
This is in the Coral Reef area?
If it happens, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be canceled this month, but
Okay,
I'll give you guys
okay.
bids.
Anyway, I think the follow-up to this is what I said before, is that it's an ongoing issue. It's been an issue that I know some of these community members have been tracking since roughly 2002, so that's a decade. There's still, although there have been, at least recently, some advances made, I think it's not at a point where it's anywhere close to being a settled issue, especially with the rules, regulations, when inspections happen, why is that a puzzle to the community? So I think that will be ongoing discussions that we'll have, and, you know, I know Rich has got a lot of, background on that, so we'll probably talk to him some more, and John, who's sort of stepped up to the plate as, the point man for other issues, Mr. Wong, I guess, for GGNRA and Nancy, we can follow up with you, and Paul likewise, and to Jim in the back on CUSD. I do want to thank you for coming here and giving the community the information, and we'll continue working with you. I think and at that point, I'm not quite sure how we're going to go about addressing the summary of this to the county, but I imagine we'll get together and draft a letter and bring it back to the council.
I think what I've heard from the overall comments is a number of specifics with regard to the management, both of conservation in general and particularly fire danger. Both Post and GGNRA have spoken to a desire to transfer responsibility as far as GGNRA's ownership of Corral de Tierra goes. Post is still the holder of record for Wicklow, which is also a major area of concern. So certainly looking for coordination, because now you have those adjacent properties as well as the school district. I think with respect to anything that relates to slowing or asking for a stop with regard to the transfer, as was implied in some of the messages and one person the public has spoken to, nothing's being brought forward to the council to take action there. Correct?
Yeah, that was not part of this discussion.
Well, it certainly was implicit in some of the communications and the concern on the transfer, so I think we're taking no stand there.
Early on, before we had a meeting and got consensus with the group, there was some, the consensus from the group is what was presented tonight.
I understand, but that was there, and also the public has spoken with concern, so we're not taking any further action there. Okay. I want to thank all of you, both the public and all of the agencies, for coming. I think we can see from the discussion it's a complex issue, and what I hear from Bill is we plan to stay with it and continue.
As everybody prepares to leave, keep in mind it's a hospital, so the loud conversations need to take place outside.
Okay. I think we're going to have just a 5-minute break for the MCC, and then we'll reconvene with item 4B.